So good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Arthur Vaughn. I am the Health and Wellness Chair for the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta, Inc. Tonight, we're going to do the next in our Health and Wellness series. And tonight, we're going to be talking about Not on Our Watch, intimate partner violence. Today, we have some great speakers, and our session will be moderated by Reverend Tracy Harris, a member of the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta, and our former membership chair and current chaplain. Reverend Tracy R. Harris is a teacher, preacher, international worship leader, choir director, and entrepreneur. He spent many years in gospel music, studying and working under some of the greatest gospel recording artists and pastors. His electrifying style of teaching, praise and worship, and developing choirs and praise teams has earned Reverend Harris esteem across the United States. He is a native of Chicago, Illinois, where he accepted his call to ministry of the gospel of Jesus Christ at the young age of 12. He serves as associate pastor at Mount Welcome Missionary Baptist Church in Decatur, Georgia. He serves as chaplain for the state of Georgia and several hospitals. With that said, I'd like to turn tonight's program over to Reverend Harris. Thank you.
Dr. Vaughn, thank you so much. And to my brothers, the 100 Black Men North Metro Atlanta chapter, thank you so much for allowing us to facilitate such an amazing conversation that is plaguing our community, regardless of race, creed, or culture. Through Not on Our Watch, the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, Inc. want to work with communities and individuals, such as our experts tonight, to prevent intimate partner violence, support survivors, and lessen the short and long-term harms of intimate partner violence. So our experts for tonight, Rosa James, she received her bachelor's in legal studies and master's in social work from the University of Central Florida. She started her career working in child welfare, but transitioned in 2012 to work with domestic violence survivors. Since then, she has held several local and statewide positions to support survivors of domestic violence. Her most exciting position was working in partnership with the Center for the CDC and prevention to create strategies to prevent intimate partner violence. Currently, she is the domestic violence training coordinator for the Fulton County DA, District Attorney Office, and working towards her PhD in social work, leadership, and policy. Her topic of research is Black women who are currently experiencing or have experienced intimate partner violence. And then our second panelist, our guest for tonight, another expert in this particular area, Elisa Covarrubias. She is currently the CEO at LiveSafe Resources. In this role, she is responsible for the internal operations of the organization, which includes oversights of programs and the grants which fund them. She has worked in the nonprofit sector for over 15 years, with the focus on serving those who have experienced interpersonal violence. Elisa is a 2019-2020 Georgia Women's Policy Institute Fellow and currently serves as a board member for the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Some of Elisa's favorite pastimes include singing, hey, traveling, and spending time relaxing with her partner and senior dog, Mookie. It is with great pleasure, privilege, and honor that we welcome our panelists and our special guests tonight, Elisa and Rosa. And we would like to give a huge shout out to all of the brothers that are on the call and sisters. And then, of course, our president, Bernard Johnson of the North Metro Atlanta chapter. So Bernard, we say hello to you, sir, and thank you again for allowing us to have this panel. Dr. Vaughn, we want to give you a huge kudos shout out for the health and wellness team, just putting on some amazing virtual experiences. This is teaching session, and thank you for your leadership in that area. Panelists, let's go to work. Let's educate. Elisa, let's start with you tonight. Tell us a little bit about yourself other than what I just read, and let's kick it off that way.
Sure. So as you mentioned in my bio, I currently work at LiveSafe Resources. We are a dual domestic violence and sexual assault crisis nonprofit. We are located in Marietta, Georgia, but we serve Cobb, Paulding, and Cherokee counties primarily, but we don't turn anyone away based on where they are. Additionally, previous to that, I also worked in the same field in Douglas County. And before that, I was in Fort Lauderdale, also working with people who have experienced domestic violence. So this is something I'm passionate about, and I'm very honored to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much for being here. Rosa, your turn.
So I work for the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. I work in the Special Victims Unit, and we have a specialized domestic violence unit named after Madam D.A. Willis, her aunt or family friend. Her name is Brenda Baham. And I am the domestic violence training coordinator, but I also do victim advocacy. So our caseload, backlog is high. So even though you're an administrative position, you have to participate and serve in the community. And also I wanted to say I'm originally from Tallahassee, Florida. I did a lot of work throughout Florida, and I really have only been in Atlanta for about 3 years. So this city is very new to me, and I guess it's okay.
Well, we say welcome and thank you so much. Let's dive right in. Whichever one would like to take this first, but let's start tonight with intimate partner domestic violence.
Go ahead, Rosa.
Okay, so I want to start with a definition of intimate partner violence because that's something that the community doesn't really understand. And it is a coercive pattern of behaviors to maintain and exert power over their partner. And when I say it's a pattern, it's coercive over time to gain and maintain that control. It's not a one-time incident, and it's more than just physical abuse. We have a whole wheel, a power and control wheel that shows about economic abuse. It talks about emotional abuse. And I know that some on the call are familiar with this term that's coming forward called gaslighting. It includes all of those things. And we're going to discuss a lot of that on this Zoom.
You summed that up really well, Rosa. The CDC definition is short. It just says the term intimate partner violence describes physical, sexual, or psychological harm by a current or former partner or spouse. This type of violence can occur among heterosexual or same-sex couples and does not require sexual intimacy. That's the CDC version. But I like that you mentioned in it the coercion aspect of it, and that there are a number of tactics that are used to maintain that power and control. So that is at the very core of this. And that's one thing that I want you all to remember if you take something away from this, that it's not just the physical violence. The physical violence is just one of the many ways that abusive partners maintain that power and control. But as Rosa mentioned, there's financial abuse, there's psychological abuse, and there are many other different things that abuser gets to learn what the vulnerabilities are of the victim over time, and they will use those against them to maintain that power and control.
Now, Rosa, you mentioned gaslighting. What is gaslighting?
So we describe it in the movement as crazy making behavior. It's basically, if I have a pen on the table and I place it down and I walk away and I come back to get that pen and it's missing, and I ask my partner, where did my pen go? And my partner says, I don't know, I didn't see a pen there. And then I walk back in the room to find another pen, and I come back, my pen is back on the table. And I say, did you take my pen? No, it was never missing. I try to use that example, but it's basically telling someone that their reality is not true and making them feel like they have some type of psychological problem or they're insane for that reality that is being presented. And it's just basically emotionally abusing them. That's kind of what gaslighting is. That's why I use the pen analogy, because if the pen was there before, where did it go? And the only person who took it was my partner.
Elisa, your thoughts?
That very well. I don't have anything to add to that. I could only give you more examples, but that's a very simple one. And I've definitely had clients that have experienced very similar.
So the long-term effects that it have on individuals that are experiencing this are what? I mean, this is, you're basically playing with me, or you're playing with the individual.
It can certainly lead to a person feeling like, if, as Rosa said, crazy making. So the person feeling like, is there something wrong with me? And that is, again, one of the tactics that the abusive partner may use. Somebody's phone or something is still making some noise. I don't
We
think
would like to ask that everybody mute your phone, please, as we have this discussion. We want to make sure that we hear every person's comments, et cetera. Please just mute your phone for us. I'm sorry, Lisa.
Thank you. So that makes it more difficult for that person to leave or to make a plan to leave when they're doubting themselves. It's very common that the abusive partner may say, well, no, clearly there's something wrong with you. You need mental health help. You're accusing me of being abusive, but you don't know what you're talking about. And here's an example, you know. And the trauma of abuse long-term can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health and physical health problems, because we know trauma does also affect our physical bodies. It can lead to having decreased immune system, aches and pains, depression. People who have experienced domestic abuse tend to have higher rates of suicide as well.
Can you give us some statistics from the CDC that really give us an idea of the amount of domestic violence cases per year?
Well, we always start with 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men have experienced some type of sexual or intimate partner violence, physical violence in their lifetime. That fluctuates from 1 in 3. I think we're back to 1 in 4. That's just off the top of my head. And also I want to take note about Black women in domestic violence homicide. I know we're not there yet, but every 4 out of every 100,000 Black women die of domestic violence homicide. Now that may not seem like a lot, but compared to white women, which is 1, it's very alarming. And that's why the CDC has made it a priority to address that issue. Just a side note, and I know we're going to go there. So
let's go, Lisa.
That's huge. I don't have a list of CDC statistics in front of me, but I think what she said is typically what we hear as the statistics for, you know, how often women experience that. And then I know here in Georgia, I don't think we are this year, but I know in recent years we were ranked in the top 10 for homicides related to domestic violence, most of those committed with a firearm. And I do think it is important to be clear that this is also a gendered issue, that while some men are victims of domestic violence, those who lose their lives to domestic violence or intimate partner violence typically are women. And as Rosa mentioned, oftentimes those rates are higher for Black women.
Domestic abuse leads to more than 30,000 deaths each year in the United States. That's over 82 people per day, which include women, children, men, but mainly women and children. 20%, approximately 6,000 of these deaths are innocent bystanders. It has been reported that this number is a far stretch from the total number of soldiers killed in the war on Afghanistan. In the reality, we are losing more people to senseless deaths right here on our own soil than we lose in a war to protect it. What are we doing? What's being done? Either there in Fulton County, Rosa, or there with LiveSafe resources. What are you guys doing to help that number decline? Resources.
So actually, my position was created to decrease the number of domestic violence homicides in Fulton County. And right now we are strategizing around holding batters accountable and building community capacity around holding batters accountable. Because one problem is we are very focused on the victim, the survivor or thriver, however they want to be called, and not really holding the batterer or the perpetrator accountable for their actions. And we're trying to change community belief systems around that. That's what we're doing in Fulton County right now. Because building capacity with partnerships, we've been doing that for years. We need to start strategizing and doing something different in our communities.
So are the criminals being are they being locked up? I mean, let's just get real with it. Are they being held accountable? Or do we see a pattern of the same abusers being released right back into the population, to the community?
So the judges are neutral parties and they get to decide if that defendant gets bond, right? We can make our case, we can argue, but if they do not have previous history or they are connected to the community, most likely they're gonna get a bond and be back out in the community, right? A lot of the cases are played out with agreements and not going to trial, and we're referring them to batterers intervention programs and probation instead of prison time. Also, due to belief systems in the community, to take that case to trial would be a hard sell sometimes, unless there is physical injury. And we also need to say that, that the statutes don't include emotional, economical, and other forms of abuse. The statutes only include physical abuse.
And I do want to kind of continue with what she's along the lines of what she's saying. So we have had domestic violence programs. I think some of them started in the 60s here in the United States, and then over time became more prevalent in different communities, and then had government funding. And so there are a lot more initiatives now. But traditionally, our response to domestic violence has been, why doesn't she just leave? Right? And we give people the phone numbers to shelters, and we expect that that's going to fix the situation. But we know now over the years that we can build bigger and bigger shelters, and they will always be full on any given day or night. You call around and try to get somebody into a domestic violence shelter, and most of the places will say, we're full, try again tomorrow. And we shouldn't have to build bigger shelters. We need to be looking at other means of addressing this issue. We also have to keep in mind that people who commit violence against their partners, they are humans too, and their partners and their children love them and their parents love them. And we have to find different ways to reach those people as well. The criminal justice response does work to some degree. It's helpful for me when I'm working with a client if we're trying to get this person to safety, and I know that the batterer is at least in jail for the weekend. Great, we have a little time, right? But that doesn't mean that eventually when they serve their time and they're out again, that they won't reoffend. Is jail going to fix that? It doesn't. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that that's the best deterrent, right? There are other things that we need to look at. So she mentioned something about batterers intervention or family violence intervention programs. These are programs, they're different from anger management. They're typically about 24 weeks in this state. Different states have different lengths of time for that. And that is a program that does try to change the behavior of the person who's been using abusive tactics against their partner. I think that it's a very helpful one. I would love to see that be more commonplace. Usually that only happens when the person's been sentenced, or it's part of their sentence or a diversion program, or there's a protective order in place. A judge has to order it a lot of the time. Other ways that we're looking to address these issues are by coordinating our community response. So that's working with our multidisciplinary partners, such as law enforcement, prosecution, treatment specialists, our advocacy programs, and putting out prevention programs into the community, letting people know what are the services, and to hold accountable. There are different ways to do that, right? Like jail is one of them, but there was a program, I forget where it was, I was listening to it the other day, and they really track the abusive person throughout. They're really like checking in on them. There's community around that person too. And I think that's important. A lot of people who have learned that abusive behavior, they learned it when they were younger and they're repeating it. I'm not saying that's an excuse. It's still a choice at the end of the day, but how do we reach those people who still have a chance to change their behavior, I guess?
To learn more about the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta, go to www.northmetro100.org. We're having a conversation, a virtual conversation on domestic violence, not on our watch. This is a series that our health and wellness team has put together, and it is going absolutely fabulous. Remember, I want to remind you tonight to place your questions in the chat. So Rosa, I want you to just take some time to just really expound on whatever your heart is. What do you want to share with us tonight regarding domestic violence?
My first thought is that the community needs to believe survivors. And that is very important because social norms and religious beliefs and all these things that we have been taught has taught us to like guide survivors in different ways that are harmful. My second piece is that you can't just leave. That is the most lethal time. I'm being really honest with you all. That's when most of our survivors die and they become true victims when they leave, because that batterer, that person has lost control of that survivor, and that's how they get their power back or assert their power. And sometimes they will kill children in themselves and leave the survivor alone by herself. And also, I want to engage more. I'm going to be really real. I want to engage more men and boys in this work and really have a conversation, because we can't eradicate this type of violence if we all don't come together and do it, right? And I want men and boys to be more engaged in this work. I want them to have the courage to dispel their belief systems around misogyny and what they feel about women and what they've been taught, and just come in with an open heart and wanting to hear women in their stories instead of calling me bitter when I have to try to have this training with you. And the last piece I want to say is that this is a serious issue in the Black community. Like, Black women are dying. We are at the highest rates of any other race of women. And it's not our fault. It's not our fault, but there's other pieces to it, because oppression is really the disease, and intimate partner violence and sexual violence are symptoms of that oppression that we suffer in our community, just like police brutality and any other type of ism that's in place, right? So if we can't eradicate oppression, if we can't add that symptom to eradicate as well. So I just want to put that out there. In my last piece about legal system and law enforcement, I know I do work in the legal system, but we do know that the Black community has an inherent distrust of the legal system and law enforcement. And that is a piece that may be possibly contributing to our deaths. So that's my piece.
You have both sides of the spectrum when you talk about the legal system. You have those who are afraid to report it, and then you have those that are vindictively reporting stuff that's not true. What do we do?
So when we think about false reporting and reports that are not true, that is a very small piece of the reports that come in.
There you go.
Yes. As far as sexual violence, less than 1% of reported cases are false. And that's reported, because we know there's a lot that are unreported. So there's 99% that are true. So in the movement, we focus on that 99%, and we work with the justice system to resolve that 1%, right? We work with them like, okay, we will work with you. But that alarming 99% is where we focus in as far as the movement and people like us who support survivors and thrivers.
Elisa, pour your heart out. What do you want to share with us tonight?
And she hit so much of it on the head right there. The why don't you just leave? That is the most dangerous time. And so we don't advise that for anyone. If someone is considering leaving, or they just want to know what their options are, we want to talk to that survivor about safety in whatever their situation is. People aren't always ready to leave. They may not want to leave. They might just be looking for more information. And that's okay. We can talk to them about, if you are still living with this person, how can you be safe in your home? How can you talk to your kids about being safe in your home? If you are thinking about leaving, what are the steps that you need to take before you do that so you can leave as safely as possible? If you listen, when you hear on the news, murder, suicide, most of the time that is a domestic violence case. And you'll also hear with that the victim recently got a protective order, or you'll hear estranged partner or spouse. You'll hear maybe that they got a divorce or that there was a custody issue in place. And so that right there signals to you if somebody's talking about leaving, you may want to encourage them to speak to somebody at a domestic violence organization about that. Or if they've got a case in the criminal justice system, they may have an advocate from the district attorney's office or the solicitor's office that can also talk to them about developing a safety plan so that they can take the steps appropriate to protect themselves and their kids as best as possible. Also about prevention work is, sometimes I think people think prevention is talking to folks about how to protect themselves from violence, but it really is about changing cultural norms. It is about changing our society. And it is about working with men and boys. Men and boys also tend to be victims of violence at the hands of other men and boys. For example, we do sexual assault medical forensic exams on site. The majority of the victims that we see, the patients that we see for those exams are women. A small percentage are men, but overwhelmingly, the majority of the perpetrators in those cases are other men, whether the victim is male or not. So how do we change some of these societal norms that lead to violence? There are some excellent anti-violence activists and professionals who are out there doing wonderful work. And I'll put some of their names in the chat in case you'd like to find out more about them. But some of them include Tony Porter from A Call to Men. There's a local organization in Atlanta, Men Stopping Violence, that I highly recommend. Jackson Katz, Russ Funk. Those are some of them. And
Byron
then
Hart.
also, oh, sorry, yes, you have some
Byron
suggestions.
Hart, yeah.
Yeah, and I really applaud them for what they're doing. I think too long it's been looked at as a women's issue, but it affects all of us. We even had last year, unfortunately, somebody who worked at our courthouse who intervened. He happened to be doing an extra job on the weekend, like delivering food or something, totally random. He stopped someone from murdering his estranged partner, his ex-wife. And he was shot in the process and lost his life. Like how random is that? But it affects the entire community. It affects children. It affects your neighbors. Somebody that you love has probably experienced this, if not you directly.
I have one more piece. I do want to acknowledge that men experience this type of abuse, and that men tend to, when it becomes lethal, women tend to use weapons like objects and not their limbs as weapons. But I do want to acknowledge that that type of abuse exists, because we are getting very gender specific, and I don't want to leave that component out, especially because we are talking to men.
Well,
Thank
the
you.
100 Black Men of Atlanta is doing an amazing job of speaking to our youth. Ladies, if you would, Elisa, starting with you, talk to the young men.
Well,
Oh,
oh no,
we all
that's
have
fine.
a lot to say.
Yeah.
No, wait, Rosa, wait. Elisa, go ahead.
I think it's important, particularly for men, to have these conversations with other boys and men, to be that role model. So I love what you all are doing, and that you focus on mentoring. I think that is fantastic. And part of being that role model is showing that you can have varied interests, that you can be vulnerable, that it isn't important to always be the person with the upper hand or the power and control in the situation. These are some of the messages that we unfortunately give men in our society, and it's harmful to men too. It's why some men don't access counseling. As Rosa said, it's why some men don't come forward when they are being abused, and they should. They have every right, just like anyone else, to access those services and to be safe and to be treated with dignity. They don't have to just hold it all in because they need to man up or anything like that.
Wow. Rosa, you work with the Fulton County DA's office. Come on, talk to the young man.
So I typically, when I engage boys, I talk about this gender boxing. We know about this gender box, right? I try to get boys to understand that these characteristics that you think it is to be a man is really not these characteristics, right? Like, there are so many other things that contributes to growing up and being a man and having healthy relationships with your partners. So I try to get that vulnerability out of them, so they don't feel like they have to man up, which often means anger is the accepted trait from men, not tears, not empathy, not supportive. Give your brother a hug, it's okay. Like, I try to talk about those things with boys. So when they become adults, they feel okay having supportive, meaningful friendships with other men and feel comfortable with having those conversations with other men so that they don't feel like they have to constantly hold anger or hold things in to be a man.
We've talked about intimate partner violence. What about support for survivors?
So I worked at Harbor House in Central Florida in Orlando, Florida. We had 110 beds in our safe house, but we also had services such as outreach, where we safety plan and follow the survivor in the community. We had rapid rehousing, where we would pay first and last month's rent, deposit, and case manage them throughout the year to essentially get them into stabilized housing, because ultimately what the movement is moving towards is providing the survivor with what they need instead of immediately saying, come into safe house. Because sometimes a survivor just needs a ticket to New York, or that survivor just needs a new apartment or a washing machine. So that's where we're going.
So at our organization, we do provide similar services. So we have a 24-hour crisis line, and anyone can call if they are seeking to make a safety plan or they're looking for emergency shelter. We do have a housing program that includes transitional housing, where people can stay for up to 24 months if needed, but it is a process program. Like the emergency shelters first come, first serve based on imminent danger. Our housing programs, a person has to have some income by that point, and there are different steps to take to getting into that. We also do rapid rehousing. So we pay for some people who can qualify for their own apartment. If you don't have to come to shelter, you probably don't want to. I wouldn't want to. So let's just get you in your own apartment, right? We do the medical forensic exams for anyone age 13 and up if there has been a sexual assault. And we have advocates that are stationed in the Cobb County Courthouse who assist with filing temporary protective orders Monday through Friday. That is free of charge. We also offer individual and group counseling. We have advocates that work with law enforcement to do outreach to people who have experienced domestic violence and sexual assault as well.
You're tuning into the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta. This is our series, Domestic Violence Not on Our Watch. And we have two panelists, two amazing panelists. Elisa is here, who is the CEO of LiveSafe Resources, as well as Rosa, who is here. She works at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Rosa and Lisa, domestic violence is increasingly plaguing our communities. News reports of fatalities from domestic violence are continuing to air on the nightly news. Memorials, funerals, these things are still being planned each and every day. Candlelight vigils are being planned. They've been held around the world. Lobbyists are feverishly working around the nation to move the needle towards the goal of eradicating domestic violence. When you hear of the term, see something, say something, what comes to mind? Rosa.
So this is called bystander intervention, right? And when I hear that term, I tell the community, only intervene if it's safe to do so. So if saying something just means I'm standing by the corner and I can just call 911, that could be that intervention to see something, say something. But I often tell the community, when you intervene, make sure it's safe to intervene and be open to be a part of a safety plan for a survivor, even if it means just calling the police when she turns on her light outside her home. That's what comes to mind for me. And bystander intervention is a whole research in itself. We used to have Green Dot, where we would go to colleges and talk about that intervention on campuses and universities. So that's what comes to mind when you say, if you see something, say something.
Thank you. Elisa.
Yes, and another means of safely intervening if it's not right at that moment, because sometimes, as she mentioned, it's not safe to intervene. If you're able to give that person that is going through a difficult time, if you're able to get them some information, that is so key, so important to help empower them in that situation. We may not be able always to tell them what's the best course of action. You might not know what are the options available to them, but you can at least point them in the right direction so that they can seek that help and then make decisions for how they want to proceed with their own situation.
Okay. we're getting ready to open the floor for questions, but I just want to share a resource. And ladies, I'm going to ask you to share resources as well. But God allowed me to pen a book called Domestic Violence Not on My Watch. Domestic Violence Not on My Watch is a call for community members to take a seat at the table and learn how each of our roles are interdependent in the goal of saving lives. In this book, you'll hear from the voice of the survivor. You'll hear from the awakened abuser, family and friends of the community that have been abused, parents of the abused, attorneys, doctors, and of course, me and others, pastors. Just want to share this resource to you, for you. You can reach it, actually pick it up on Amazon.com. Elisa, any resources you would like to share with the family before we open up for questions?
Sure. I put a few things in there. I saw our website was posted as a resource for those looking for services. And I also listed a couple of people that work in prevention or work with boys and men, such as Tony Porter from A Call to Men, Jackson Katz, Russ Funk. I know, Rosa, you had some others. I didn't get a chance to list them in here. And I added a wonderful documentary that I really think is helpful in this discussion. And it's called The Mask You Live In. I put a link to it there. And then I also put a couple of book names as well as yours, Dr. Tracy Harris. So you're listed on there as well, but feel free to look at the chat if you'd like to copy some of those down.
Rosa.
So one resource I want to talk about, is the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I used to be the training coordinator there. That is a wonderful resource, and their crisis line is actually being directed to the National Hotline Against Domestic Violence, the National Hotline. So if you could get connected locally, we could get you to local centers without you going through that route, but it's one. And the district attorney's office, we are a resource. We have myself, I'm the domestic violence advocate too. I have my colleague, Caitlin. We both have those like abundance of resources. We even have a resource for people who work in the restaurant field and they lost their job or was injured due to domestic violence. And so that program is very flexible because it's not paperwork. So I can't remember the name of it, but I will get it to your organization and get the information to you. So okay. That is it outside of what's already been stated.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dr. Vaughn.
Yes. So two things. One, we have a small group. So if you have a question, please go ahead and you can ask it or you can put it in the chat. I put this in the wrong place in the chat. I sent it to Reverend Tracy when I meant to send it to everyone. If you'd like a copy of Reverend Tracy's book, I'm going to put that information in my email in the chat. If you email me, the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta will send you a copy of Reverend Tracy's book. Yes, Tracy, we'll pay for them. But before we open it up to questions, Elise, I want to, we talked before we got on air about the men's group where men could be involved and help support and get this message out and be advocates. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of that group and what you're doing? So if men on here would like to get involved, we can get involved and be advocates beyond tonight.
That's right.
So first, I did post a link to Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, which Rosa mentioned. They have a list on there of different domestic violence agencies around the state, and they also help with the statewide crisis line. So I know I talked a bit about the organization that I work for, but we are located in Cobb, and I know that's not central to everyone. So the group that Dr. Vaughn is referring to is currently called Safeguards, and it's a way for men to be more involved because we have had a lot of wonderful men ask how they can help. And there are a number of ways that people can be involved in that group. A small number of the members feel comfortable doing speaking events after training, and those are the people that we'd like to have do some mentorship with young folks or go into schools to speak with them about these issues, about healthy relationships, about alternatives to violence. And then others can help with different things. Their fundraising needs. Sometimes we actually just need folks to come and help us assemble a bunch of new metal bed frames because we got bed bugs on our wooden frames at the shelter. Things like that happen. People ask me, well, what's your day-to-day like? I'm like, well, let me see what's going on today. Today we have bed bugs. So we've had that need before too. And just to have a group of folks that care and want to come out to help. That's one of the many different things that you can do as part of safeguards. And I'll put the information in the chat as well.
At this time, we'd like to open the floor for any questions that you may have for either Rosa or Elisa, myself, or even Dr. Vaughn. Chat, let's see. You may unmute your phone at this time. Dr. Vaughn, do you see any in the chat? You're on mute, sir.
I'm sorry, I do not see any questions in the chat at this time.
Okay.
I actually saw one question in the chat.
Maybe I've been posting so many things in the chat, I missed it. But if you, let's find it.
You see it, Rosa?
Here it is. What are some early warning signs of abuse in relationships?
So for my, okay, so I'm gonna give you my professional perspective. And this is what I tell everyone who come up to me and know that I work in this field and want me to tell them how to spot an abuser. There's no real way to assume that someone will or will not be abusive. But I will tell you what has been stated from survivors in interviews. The relationship moves fast. Like, I love you in three days, 3 weeks, or whatever. It just moves really fast. We go from meeting to marriage to babies within 3 months, 3 to 6 months. It's just a fast moving pace relationship. Also, they say that their abuser is charming, right? Swept them off their feet, Prince Charming, told them everything they wanted to hear. And then a year later, the abuse starts. So those are like 2 traits that I've heard, but I always go with the disclaimer that there are really no true signs to spot an abuser. It's just, you just have to use yourself as that gauge. Is like, is this person right for me? Or are we a good fit? But those are 2 traits that I've been noticing through conversations.
And then teens, it can look like, it's hard to tell sometimes, right? Because they're always texting each other or on Snapchat or whatever, but excessive demanding of time. So like, if you don't text me back within 10 minutes, you know, having a reaction that would not be really normal is kind of a weird word to say because people can't always identify that, but something excessive or wanting to spend all the time together, eventually that leads to isolation. So at first it may start with, well, you didn't call me back in 20 minutes. I thought something was wrong, to you see your sister all the time. Do you really have to hang out with her again? And eventually the isolation grows in severity. And a lot of those things precede any actual physical violence. Also being possessive, being overly jealous, trying to control the person's whereabouts or what they're wearing, things like that, demanding that they share any passwords or other things that they're not comfortable sharing or doing.
Okay. Any questions, anybody? Well, as we prepare for our final remarks and words and thoughts.
Tracy, another
Yes,
question,
sir.
Another question popped up in the chat.
Go ahead.
What types of outside counseling supports are there for students experiencing or living through abuse?
When you say, oh, okay. When I think about students, college students or teenagers?
Let's start with our kids, the young people. I'm sorry, K through 12. And then talk about college. We can talk about them separately or together, however that works, but both, yeah.
Okay, so when I worked at Harbor House in Orlando, Florida, we had advocates for teenagers that would set up counseling sessions through our therapists at our center for teens. But the thing about teens is there is a barrier of parental consent. Like the parent has to consent to this. And sometimes teens don't want to come forward for that because they don't want to tell their parents. But, you know, the domestic violence centers, I believe many in Georgia have teen programs where they can refer to their counselors who they have on site. for teenagers. And as far as college, I do know Spelman has a department specifically designed for domestic violence, and you can be referred to the counseling service centers on campus if you're a student.
Yes, so it does vary by region and what resources are available. The fact of it is that there are places in Georgia where there are fewer resources available of various kinds, right? So like in Metro Atlanta, you can find centers that have counseling available for free or low cost. Sometimes there are resources available through the schools. If there was a police report filed from an incident, then something we have in the state called crime victims compensation could potentially cover counseling costs, but there is a whole process to that. And then there are child advocacy centers, but the person has to have come through one of them. So not all cases will go through them. If somehow the child was harmed or is included in an investigation because there was either child abuse or the child was in the middle of the situation, witnessed the abuse, they may be referred to a child advocacy center. And some of those places do offer counseling. There is a high demand right now for counseling everywhere. So most places have a wait list on top of that, unfortunately.
Wow. All right, any other questions at this time? I saw some people unmuting their phones. You can chime in now.
How you doing? Thanks for this event and putting it on. I have a question. When we was talking about, the young males and the older males talking, I guess is a trait that we're seeing out there that the young male batterer was living in an abusive home or something like that. I was trying to see how do we link that to them getting older? Is it something they saw from, parents, or are we saying that they experienced it from a youth relationship?
I don't have statistics to share on that. That is a great question. So what I have seen, what I can tell you is that there are a lot of people who, they have experienced that, but not everyone who experienced that as a youth becomes abusive. So, there are protective factors, and then there are factors that maybe contribute to that person's difficulty overcoming those traumatic issues, perhaps. So that can be, what is the rest of the family like? Maybe are there other good teachers, other role models that they have? Was there some form of intervention at some point in their youth? But yes, a lot of that is learned behavior. And that's a good question, because there's a myth that mental illness causes abuse, but that's not the case. You will see with abusers that they can be very calculating. And then you have people who actually do have a mental health diagnosis who simply do not have the ability to carry out some of these things because of their mental health diagnosis, their mental illness diagnosis. So I think that's an important point to differentiate too. Can there be both going on? Sure, but that's not the cause of abuse. It's again, at the core of that is power and control. Rosa, did you have anything?
So I wanted to add two things. First, that we need to understand that this is a learned behavior, and that it's a belief system that this person believes that they have a right to have power and control over their partner, just like you believe in God. That's how they believe in that type of relationship dynamic. But it can be learned anywhere. It does not have to be in the home. And my second point, the mental illness part, right? Right now, there's this thing about narcissists, right? This is a DSM-5 diagnosis, right? Well, it's not really a diagnosis, but because personality disorders that's not a clinical, it's not really a clinical diagnosis per se, in that just because someone has a personality disorder such as borderline, narcissist, or whatever, Harassianic personality disorder, doesn't mean that that personality disorder is causing the abuse. It's really a belief system. Now, that narcissist may have a belief system that they can gain and maintain power and control over their partner, but that doesn't mean that automatically my abuser was a narcissist. And I think that too many people are making diagnoses who are not trained to do so.
Any other questions? Any other suggestions or comments?
So if somebody came to us and said, hey, Dr. Tracy, Dr. Vaughn, Brian, whomever, right? One of our mentees or some young or a friend, male or female, and says, hey, I'm in this abusive relationship. I think I'm in an abusive relationship and XYZ is going on, whatever that happens to be. What would you recommend we do? You gave the example earlier when someone intervened and ended up getting shot and killed, right? So how can we help as men without getting into that kind of situation that results in the loss of life?
Yes, the situation I mentioned, this person had the active intent at that moment to go and kill the victim and had a weapon, and this guy intervened despite how dangerous it was for him. So I don't recommend trying to wrestle a weapon out away from anybody, but that's a great question, right? Because that's not usually what you're going to be presented with. I think if the person is saying, hey, I'm experiencing this, and you think it's abuse, you think that what that person is experiencing abuse is, tell them, I believe them, that you believe them, and thank them for sharing that with you. And then let them know that they're not alone and that there are resources for them. Again, you don't have to have all of the information. You can refer them to a program that's nearby. If they want to talk to somebody, if they feel more comfortable talking to you, one thing you can do is discuss safety with them. Ask them what they can do to be safe in this situation. And if needed, you can document somewhere what occurred. If you notice any visible injuries on them, or they told you about a physically violent incident that occurred, you can write that down for them. That could be useful for them later. It can even be just a matter of reflecting that back to them in the future, like, hey, you've told me about this number of incidents, because sometimes it just becomes part of the everyday life for a person who's living that. And conversely, if it's somebody who's coming to you and saying, hey, I'm concerned about some of my own behavior, I've been acting in a way I'm not too proud of, and this is what happened, and I called my partner these names. Also say, thanks for coming to talk to me. Let's talk about why that happened. Do you want to speak to a counselor? Do you want me to find more resources for you? And just offer to be a support. I think people sometimes shy away from some conversations because you feel like you just don't know what to say, but you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be open to it, I think.
Rosa.
The only item I want to add is when the survivor or the person that trusts you come to you, try your hardest not to trash or down talk their partner, because what happens if you trash talk the partner and they decide to go back to the relationship, it becomes isolating and they don't want to come back to you due to embarrassment and shame. So do your best to help them with a safety plan or refer them to a safe place, and not so much focusing on how the abuser, because we can hyper focus on that because we were like, finally, he or she finally left this person. But that's not always the best plan of action.
Okay.
That's hard to do when you care about somebody and they say, hey, this happened to me. You're like, what? I knew he was no good,
Right.
You get mad, but so it's hard to resist that urge, but that's so true, Rose.
And then that's when you get the family dynamic in, friends, cousins, aunties, girlfriends, it gets convoluted. Dr. Vaughn, you were going to say something.
Sure. Part of my job is timekeeper, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Tracy to close us out. Before we do, I want to do a couple of housekeeping notes as the Health and Wellness Chair for the 100. One, in the chat, I put a link. We do this every month. On the third Tuesday of every month, we have a health and wellness conversation. And I put a link in the chat where you could go see the previous conversations we've had over the course of the year on a wide variety of topics, right? So I wanted to make sure that if you wanted to access for that, and this conversation will also be there as soon as I give it to our production people to do what they do. And lastly, before I turn it over to Reverend Tracy, next month, we're going to have a session called Your Health is Your Wealth. And we're going to have an attorney on talking about estate planning and planning for your future. So we look at health from not only the clinical and the different things that are going on with our bodies, but also mental health, as well as topics like tonight. With that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Reverend Tracy to close us out. But again, thank you, ladies, for joining us. And thank you, everybody that tuned in.
I would like to thank my brothers, the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta, for allowing me to facilitate this amazing discussion. I want to thank our special guests and subject experts, Elisa as well as Rosa. Thank you guys for your time, your tutelage, but most of all, your voice. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you're doing in the community. It is indeed needed. The rising number of fatalities make it clear to each and every one of us that it's time we turn up the heat on this issue called domestic violence. We can no longer afford to be fragmented as a nation, focusing solely on our local communities. It's time we all take a strategic global approach to ending domestic violence. Rosa, your last thoughts and comments.
Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for listening. There are a few people on the call that knows how to get to me. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me and let me know if you want me to come in and speak to a group or do a presentation. I'm also open to doing that. But there are a few people on here that can connect you so that I can reach you.
Rosa is the Domestic Violence Training Coordinator for the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Elisa.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak with such a wonderful group. I appreciate what you're doing in the community and that you've already been making the efforts to reach young men and boys. That's so important, and I appreciate having the time.
Wow. Elisa is the CEO of LiveSafe Resources. And how can they reach you?
So I believe our website has been posted here in the chat, but it's pretty simple. It's just www.livesafe, LIVESAFE resources.org. You can find my contact information on there as well as our 24-hour crisis line. Feel free to reach out if we can be of any assistance. If you're close to our area and you want us to come out and do training as well, we're happy to do that. And yeah, I think that's it.
Rosa, how can they reach you?
I'm trying to unmute. I am going to put my email address in the chat for the Fulton, but you know, I'm at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 5 p.m. And if you call there and ask for Rosa James, they're gonna find me. But I'm gonna put my email address in the chat just for you if you want to email me directly and not make that phone call. But I'm definitely available with Miss Fannie, Madam DA Willis. She will get a hold of me.
I want to thank you all for your time. Dr. Vaughn, you have some amazing resources, books that you've written. Would you mind putting that information in the group chat as well? And thank you so much for spearheading this. Can we clap our hands for the 100 Black Men of Atlanta and Dr. Arthur Vaughn? Thank you for allowing me to be your facilitator. I turn it back over to you, sir.
I have nothing else. I want to thank you all for your time. I always say there's any number of other things you could have been doing on a Tuesday evening. Thank you for spending an hour with us, and hopefully we'll see you again next month and into the future. Again, thank you all and have a great night.